Hey everyone, and welcome to the Irenic Ref podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gross. The word Irenic means aimed at or aiming towards peace. And my goal with this podcast is to try to create a bridge between coaches and officials by showing the humanity of each other in a more robust way, which isn't necessarily achievable in the minimal interactions a coach and official may experience during a game. With all that said, let's get to it. Today's guest has been coaching for roughly 24 years. 6 of those were at the collegiate level as an assistant at both USF and DW. But the last 16 years have been as the head coach at Vermilion High School. He has been named Region Coach of the Year by the SD Basketball Coaches Association in 2016, 2020, and 2021. He was also one of 4 finalists for the Boys Coach of the Year after his 2021 season. His teams have won the DAC-12 conference in 2017 and 2021. The 2021 team went undefeated in the regular season and started the year with 22 straight wins. The 2021 team was the first Vermilion High School varsity boys team to make it to the state tournament since its last appearance in 1989. He has had one state tournament appearance, 193 career wins as a head coach, and he was inducted into the DW Athletic Hall of Fame in 2012. Please welcome Jay Drake. Jay, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to jump onto one thing right away. You said the past few years, in a form I had you fill out, you talked about how the past 9 years, I believe, you've had your dad as an assistant coach or a volunteer assistant. What's that experience like? And maybe give some insight into who your dad is for those like me who maybe didn't know who he was.
Right. My dad was my high school boys basketball coach. Really, probably the reason I got into coaching. Jim Drake, both my parents are Huron high school grads in the late 60s and both went on to Huron College. And then after Huron College, they wanted to venture away from South Dakota and went out to Sterling, Colorado, and they were out there for about 8-9 years. That's actually where I was born. I went through went to kindergarten in Sterling, and Sterling would be the size of their school is probably like a Yankton or Mitchell AA school. But he was the head assistant coach at the high school there, and eventually wanted to get his first head coaching job, and they wanted to be closer to home and family. And that's when he, in the fall of 1982, started at Winter High School and was the Winter High School boys basketball head coach. Also an assistant for other sports there, but the head boys coach for 31 years, retired in, that must've been 2013. They moved to Sioux Falls for a year, and then like you said, the last 9 years we've been really fortunate to have him basically driving down from Sioux Falls every day and helping us out, not just with the varsity program but with our C and JV kids. And it's been great for our program just to have his experience and wisdom. The bad news is my sister, she lives in Del Rapids, and my 2 nephews, they're kind of getting older. One's a freshman and one's a 7th grade boy, and it's time for him. He just wants to be grandpa now and kind of follow them around as they get into middle school, high school sports here. So Del Rapids, obviously, we've had big games with them in the past and some crazy endings with them, but he's going to go be a choir. And I told him, the biggest thing is he just can't sit on their bench. He can root for them, but he can't sit on the bench and help them out. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny that there's a lot of people that are getting closer to that age. Pete Entringer, one of the officials, he's saying he's getting close to that age where he's about to be more of a grandpa and less of an official. And so it's interesting to see where that kind of age hits. And then it's all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's grandpa mode. I got to go watch these games. I got to be a little bit more intentional in what I'm doing as a grandparent. And so it's kind of just interesting seeing all these people that are talking about that as I'm interviewing them, whether they're officials or coaches as well. But I think another thing to note that some people may be watching this that doesn't know is the first time I met you was you were actually a junior varsity coach over in Hanson High School. And it was my first year. I don't know how many years you had been there. Was it 1 year before that, or was that your first year as well?
Yeah, I think it was I was there 2 years, and I think it was my second year. You and your sisters, I believe it was from Huron, right? You moved
Yep.
down from Huron, and
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a nice little connection there as well with your family. But yeah, we came down, and first time I met you, we were at the Corn Belt team camp, and you're like, "What do you want to be called?" And I'm like, I don't care. And then so finally, Andy came from that, and it's funny how that name stuck all the way through high school. I was Andy, which is really funny. I didn't really care. My mom wished it was Drew, but either way,
Right.
I just thought that was interesting that that's the thing that stuck, and kind of one of my memories with you is that. And so, and I don't know, what was your impression of me? I don't know. You don't have to go super detailed. What was your first impression of me when I show up at the
I just
team
remember,
camp?
and you know this, obviously, Hanson's a tight knit community
Yeah.
and very sports minded, sports oriented, and I know from a staff, both as the teaching staff, but also the coaching staff. When we heard about your family and obviously yourself and your two older sisters, and it wasn't the thing with you guys. It wasn't just one particular sport. You all three had success in multiple sports, and I think that's very important for all kids being 2, 3 sport athletes. But it was exciting. We're kind of even here in Vermillion with the college. We have
Yeah.
people moving in and out, and you always get excited when you get a new family coming to town. And I remember that with you guys, and great family too. Obviously yourself, and just got to be around you that 1 year before I left. But then your sisters as well. And if I recall right, on the girls, I believe they won the state track championship that first year when you guys got there. And
Yep.
I think your sister scored a lot of points in
Yeah.
that state track meet.
Yeah, that first year. I mean, it definitely helped coming from Huron, coming from a bigger school. But yeah, they did have some supporting roles in Rihanna Gullickson and Alyssa Pearson and a few others
Right.
like that as well. But yeah, it was a fun time to be there. Yeah, like you'd mentioned, we were 3 sport athletes, 4 sport athletes if you count baseball for me. But yeah, it was just a fun time to adventure out, I would say, and come to a new place for me as a freshman. So as like a brand new adventure, starting new. It's not like it wouldn't be the same if I went to Huron. I would have been starting at square zero in a sense.
Right.
But yeah, it was fun having you as a coach, fun having you as the coach for the very first time that I met. I mean, I think maybe Coach Haskamp was the first one just with football because we had a team camp, but yeah, that was
Right.
it was a good interaction, a fun time to be on that JV team with you as a coach, and obviously we can see that success has played even further with your.
We had a pretty good JV team too.
Yeah, we did, we did. So that I
And
think
that's I think a lot of people know it too. And not to get off topic too much here, but
sure.
Hanson, it was only 2 years for me. Obviously, part of the reason leaving is I had aspirations of being a head boys basketball coach and having my own program. So that kind of led to but the people there and the people that are still there with Coach Bridge and Coach Altmans, and I think Coach Altmans is in some administration roles now there with as the elementary principal. But I'd gone to college with him at Dakota Wesleyan as well, so I knew him, and there's a lot of connections just from DW and Hanson. But it's a great community. I continue here 16 years later, still, whether it's football, basketball, track season, when I see the kind of the blue they got going on, light blue they like to
Yep.
wear sometimes,
Yep.
and it always gets my attention when I hear about Hanson and their athletics.
Yep. Absolutely. Same thing with me. And then that new stadium is pretty
Yes,
incredible too.
yes.
But that's a different topic. Maybe I'll have Coach Altman's on here, and hopefully he has some good words for you as well. But you talked about DW graduating from there. Let's go back a little bit further. Tell us where you graduated from. You kind of alluded to that with your dad, but tell us more about that. You're growing up, where you graduated from, and then more of your personal life, your family, and into that a little bit.
Yeah, Winter High School grad, 1994. Same thing, 3 sport athlete, played football, basketball, track. was fortunate to be on some very good teams in football. Both my junior and senior year, we made it to the Dome. Got beat my junior year by Vermilion High School. Actually, it was the end of their 3 straight in the early '90s. Jason Lieber kind of ran all over us, and they beat us 46-27. And then my senior year, we went into the state title game in football in the Dome. We were undefeated, ranked #1, and I kind of always like to say that we kind of started the West Central dynasty because they were actually kind of an underdog against us, and that was actually their first ever state football title. But they beat us in a heck of a game, triple overtime, and kind of led to many more for them. So I like to say that we kind of started that dynasty in Winter, giving them their first state title. But from Winter High School, went on to actually Northern State right out of high school. Went up there to play basketball and redshirted a year and was there another year, and then transferred from there, and obviously went to Dakota Wesleyan and played for Coach Doug Martin for 3 years, and then got to come back a few years later as an assistant for 4 years, which ended up being kind of his final 4 years in the coaching profession. So always felt I've been around, a lot of my just coaching philosophy obviously comes from my dad, and being around his programs at Winter High School and his philosophy growing up. But at Northern State, I got a chance to play for Bob Olson, who would down the road after that become the AD there. And Doug Martin, obviously, and then getting to coach under a couple of good coaches, Coach Martin being one of those. So you just kind of learn from everybody, both good and bad, and try to build a philosophy from there. And sitting here now in year 16, all of a sudden, it doesn't seem like it's been that long, but year 16 in Vermilion. And I've got one daughter, and she's actually a senior in high school. So just had homecoming last week. She was one of the royalty candidates, and just looking forward to watching her in her senior year and see how that goes, and who knows where she's off to next year.
All right. Yeah. And you talked a little bit about those who influenced you, but maybe tell us more about how you got started. I mean, it seems like you went to college, you kind of got started because did you play basketball in college?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Both at Northern and Dakota Wesleyan.
Yeah. And so let's go a little bit more into that. How you got started into coaching and involved in coaching. Did it start with your dad at Winter and you're like, hey, I kind of like what my dad's doing, I want to do that? Or once you got past playing, you're like, I want to get back to the game and coach?
Yeah, it's weird because obviously I've always been around athletics with my dad and stuff. And, my mom was also a high school English teacher, and both of them are in K-12 education. And coming out of high school, you just don't know for sure what you want to do. And athletics had been part of my life. But when I went to college, and even when I transferred to Dakota Wesleyan, I kind of went gen eds for a few years at Northern. And then I actually went into business administration, and my actual degree is business administration, behavioral science minor. I was taking some education classes, did all the education stuff, but just didn't do my student teaching. So if anything, I had one more semester for business education classes. But after, at the end of my college career, I started thinking, like anybody, or like, heck, I got to go get a job here pretty soon. And I was engaged my senior year of college, and my fiance at the time, she was living in Sioux Falls, and I figured I need to find something maybe in the Sioux Falls area. And my dad at Winter High School always had a basketball camp every year at the beginning of the summertime, and usually it was a 5-day camp, and he tried to usually get 2 of those days where he would get a kind of a college coach or a guest clinician for the day. And he'd kind of been all through all the college coaches, both men's and women's in the state. And at that time, University of Sioux Falls had just hired a brand new coach, a guy by the name of Jim Hayford out of Azusa Pacific in California. And he was one of the clinicians one of the days, and we got talking, and he had already taken the job at USF a month prior. But at that time, USF wasn't Division II. They were still NAI and the old SDIC. And we just got talking, and he said, hey, I'm still kind of putting my staff together. Have you ever thought about, coaching at the college level? And I said, yeah, sure. I mean, it'd be something. And before you know it, he brought a guy with him, Scott Day from Azusa Pacific, but then kind of rounded out his staff that first year with a guy many would be familiar with, but Brad Newitt, who does a lot of the Midco Sports
Okay.
announcing now and color man on there. But he had just finished a grad assistant job at USD, and he was one of the assistants. And then that first year, I did a lot of just JV stuff. I kind of had they still had a JV program, and so that got me into it. Was there a couple of years, and something opened up, an assistant job at DW with Coach Martin. And obviously for me, that was kind of a no-brainer, and got to go back there and be an assistant under him for 4 years.
Yeah. And that's, and it seems like a lot of times, you kind of go down this road, and a lot of people seem like they get inspired by their family. It seemed like you a little bit, but it was more so just the right chance at the right time with the opportunity that your dad presented you with, in a sense, not necessarily him, but the opportunity that was afforded in that sense. And so it's just kind of fun talking with officials and talking with coaches and seeing how like their families have kind of influenced them in a direction to be in a sense similar to them with coaching or with officiating. But you talked about some of the influences, whether that was I think you said Coach Martin and even coach at USF there. What is something, because you talked about them already as they influenced you in your coaching career. Maybe what is something that you took away from each of them that you've incorporated into your coaching styles?
Yeah, I think it's hard with all of them. I would like to think a lot of what we do from a Vermilion boys basketball program, from a culture standpoint. I'd like to think that if you had a winter high school grad and they kind of took a peek inside our program, I would think or hope a lot of that they'd be like, hey, that looks like winter high school in a way. It's funny though. I've talked to my dad over the years at times, and I think especially those first couple of years he came back to be a volunteer assistant. I think he looked at me at times and probably said, "What in the world are you doing? We never did this at Winter High School." So, but you just learn, and that I've been blessed and fortunate. Even though it didn't work out maybe athletically for me at Northern State, Bob Olson, the 2 years I was there, he's a heck of a coach. And, my redshirt year there, Eric Klein, who all-time great from Aberdeen Central, was a senior that year, the two Buckle High twins. But the way he motivated guys, and it was just amazing. Coach Martin, probably a little bit of the opposite, kind of more laid back, but really good X's and O's, and just making in-game adjustments. Coach Hayford, the 2 years at USF, from a philosophy standpoint, to be honest, we probably differ somewhat philosophy wise. Yep. And yet I think that's in a way, as a head coach, the last thing you want is to have 2-3 assistants and they're all just kind of saying yes or agreeing to everything you say. Yep. Because I think you have to have differences as a staff and stuff. And before I got into K through 12 education, another, huge probably influence for me was after I was done at Dakota Wesleyan, before I took the job at Hanson, there was 1 year in between, and I wasn't in coaching, but I went back to Northern State. Bob Olson, the men's basketball coach, he was the AD at that time, and my actual title at the time was Associate Director of Athletic Development. We still had our house in Mitchell. My daughter had just been born. She was born 3 months premature at the time, and we were trying to get the house sold. So in the meantime, my family wasn't going to move up there until we got our house sold in Mitchell. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of commuting back and forth. But during the week, I had a college teammate, Randy Baruth, who was an assistant coach at Northern at the time. But he just kind of invited me, or basically put Don Meyer, who the late great Don Meyer at Northern State, who has passed away now, but he was obviously the head coach at Northern at that time. And that year, I actually got a chance to live in his basement for 6 months during the year. Wow. He kind of took me in. And so besides the fact being around a lot of good coaches from my dad, Coach Olson at Northern, Coach Martin, Coach Hayford at USF, when you get an opportunity to live in someone's basement for 6 months, that's one of the all-time greats at any level. And just kind of hearing some of the things, I grew up as a coach's son, and he'd come down at times and maybe pop in a film, watch some film, and he'd start saying some things about the game of basketball. And I was like, what in the world is this guy talking about? Like, I should know some of this stuff, and just to learn from him. And he's just a great, kind human being too. So you take from a little bit from everybody. And the one thing I've learned as a coach, and I think all coaches would probably agree with this, is I'm getting into my late 40s now, and God willing, hopefully I'm coaching for another 20 years or whatever. But I'm far from knowing anything and everything, and I've got a lot of learning to do. And you find something every year in games, or scouting, or whatever the case is. You just watching a college game on TV, whatever it is. You always say, I've never seen this, and then something comes along, and you see something new, and you think, just when you think you've seen it all, as something else comes along. So I think it's huge for people, coaches. I know we're talking officials as well too, but you got to continue to grow and learn, and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just a nice lead in, I think, segue to the next question that I have for you. Living in a basement with one of the greatest coaches in South Dakota history, maybe of all time in the area. It's just kind of a fun story. Is there another fun story you have being the head coach at Vermilion High School?
I think it sounds so probably cliche, just saying, but the one beauty about, and you hear people say it all the time in K through 12 education, we're not doing it for the money, right? And the beauty of it, I think every year is just different.
Yeah.
We had a heck of a team. You mentioned the 2021 team that started the year 22-0. We've been fortunate to have a few kids in our program before that. It's not every day that you get a guy like AJ Plitzaway to move into your town, with his mom being the coach at USD. But we had him as a junior, senior, and to be able to coach a player like that. The kids we've had in our program, that's probably the thing I'm most proud of through our 16 years is, and I know a lot of coaches would say this, and you should, and you got a lot of pride, and you're proud of your program, but we've really had really good kids in our program, and they bought into what we're trying to do. And for the most part, we've gotten the community and parents and fans to kind of buy into what we're trying to do as well. And that's all you can ask for, is people buying in. And not to go back, you want a crazy thing though. This is going back to Coach Meyer real quick.
Sure.
The year I was in his basement, it would have been the 05-06 season, and they went, and this is unheard of, but they went 30-4 that year, and all 4 losses came to Winona State. Winona State won the Division II title that year, and I think they won 2 or 3 in a row. But Matt Hammer out of Elkton was a senior that year, and a heck of a player, and kind of led that team. But it was a really good basketball team. But you always hear how it's hard to beat a team. And Northern was really good, hard to beat a team 3 times. But Winona State obviously beat them both games in the regular season and conference play. And then they had the Northern Sun conference tournament and beat Northern in the championship game. And then the North Central Regional Tournament to go to the Elite Eight was in Winona, and they met in the championship game of that as well. And Winona got them there too, and all close, tight games. But you don't see that very often.
No, not at all. But yeah, next segueing into somewhat a different territory, dealing with officials, someone like me. Is there a memorable interaction you had with an official? Maybe it was me at a team camp, because I don't think I've ever had you during a game that's a varsity contest. But is there any memorable interactions you've had with an official that you're like, man, that was a fun interaction, or it made me laugh, or it just was a good interaction?
I don't know. If you ask some of the officials, they might say the opposite. The one thing I like to claim temporary insanity as soon as the game starts,
Okay.
and we get inside those 4 lines and stuff.
Yep.
But it's fun. The one thing, and I would say the same thing about coaching, but it's the same thing with officiating. It's not an easy job.
Yep.
And, I think we've got really good officials in this state. We're fortunate in Vermilion, the area we're in,
Yep.
where we can draw from more officials and have good officials in this area. And, my biggest concern, and I think this is a concern for everyone in the state, the Activities Association as a whole, is, like anything, we're starting to get to you're still a young pup,
Yep.
but we're getting where we're getting some officials that have done it a long time, and that's why we've had good officials in the state. But just like my dad, you're getting to a situation where they're not going to do it forever. And my fear, talking to a few of the officials, even at some of our home football games here early in the year, is you have a bigger group of in probably the next 5 to 10 years
Yep.
that are going to get out of officiating and retire and probably just go live the good life of retirement and not do it. And we don't have as many coming in. And so that's a concern. And but anytime officials work hard, and like I said, when the game gets going, you get caught in kind of the tractor beam heat of the battle.
Yep.
But I think over time you build relationships between having the officials in the games over the years, and you kind of learn from a personality standpoint what you can and can't do. And I think they learn the same thing about coaches as well. They probably say, Coach Drake's just kind of being crazy for a second here. I'll let him be crazy and look the other way. But the one thing I will say, we have with coaches, whether it's coaching clinics, seeing guys at camps and stuff, it is. And, I appreciate you with your podcast, because it got me thinking, just when you asked if I could be on here and stuff, you don't get quite as much opportunity or chances where, there'd be coaching clinics where us coaches will get together afterwards, and you might go have a root beer or a Diet Coke or something like that.
Yep.
Able to visit and talk not just sports, but life.
Yep.
And coaches and officials probably don't have that interaction as much, and that's a huge deal. I was just telling our AD Jason Huska the other day that it would be, whether it's clinics or whatever the case is, where you can get officials and coaches together more often. Because even though it's the heat of the battle, I think a lot of us coaches would find out we really, really, really like these officials, just in life in general, from a relationship standpoint. And I think it would be vice versa. So it's just one of those things. I wish we'd have more interaction from that standpoint.
Yep, absolutely. And that's, like you mentioned or alluded to a little bit, that's kind of why I want to start this podcast, just so people, if they're like, oh man, I'm going to have Coach Drake here this next week, what's he like? I can pop on and watch this video and be like, oh, okay, he might get intense here. Let me be intense. And then we can move on from there. And so I'm hoping that kind of stems from this podcast here. And then following up with that, officials, and now officials, as we talk about officials, we get into rules, and officials really like the rules. And so what is a rule in your 16 years that was added that you were glad was added, or maybe removed? Or secondly, what's one that you do not like or kind of wish was modified?
Yeah, it's, and I might go back even farther, whether you call it a rule or not. I think the biggest thing in my 16 years from a basketball coaching standpoint is the shot clock, obviously.
Yep.
That's been huge. And I think it was, I'm glad it was added here in South Dakota and stuff. But, just when you add free throws, I'm going to take you back to mid 80s now.
Sure.
But I remember I was probably, I got to think, as a fourth grader. And it was the first year of the 3-class system. And Winter High School had a kid by the name of Sam Goodhope, who would go on to be the Mr. Basketball in the state that year in 1986, his senior year. But they're playing out in the Civic Center in Rapid City in the region tournament. And at that time, it was called sectionals, and you had 4 teams. And they were playing, I believe it was what would have been Red Cloud in the first round. And that winner is going to get Pine Ridge or whatever. But at that time, there was no intentional foul.
Okay.
And at 5 fouls, it was 1-1, everything 1-1. Well, when you have the best player in the state, Sam Goodhope, but you've heard of the hack a shack,
Yeah.
but it basically Red Cloud kind of went into that. Sam Goodope would get the inbounds pass, or he gets the ball and they're going to the other end, and Winter would have a kid underneath the basket, and Red Cloud just grab them and foul them right there. Well, now obviously nowadays that'd be an intentional foul, can't do that, but kind of takes the ball out of the hands, and Winter ends up losing a close one. But just to watch, from that to be quite honest, then getting to the 7 fouls, to then finally having a double bonus, which changes the game.
Yep.
And then obviously, as you know, this year
Yep.
it changes again, more like the college women, or at the NBA level. And I wish I could tell you, I'm a little bit nervous just about that rule
Yep.
change, because I think for us at Vermilion, we try to pride or hope that we play pretty good defense without fouling. And, I know there's been a number of games where we're telling our kids at the end of the first quarter, hey, they're at 6 fouls and we're shooting the bonus this whole second quarter. And we're not always the best offensive team the way it is. So if we can get some extra points at the free throw line, where this year it would start over,
Yep.
in the second quarter, and you're trying to get back to. So that one worries me. But like anything, as coaches and, even officials, as rules change, I think it's a matter of time. Probably the toughest call, I don't know if you'd agree or not, but I think a lot of officials would say the block charge is as tough as it gets, maybe. I think it's inevitable for us to have a charge circle in the lane when that comes around, and whether that's right or wrong, but it's probably a needed addition to the high school game as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question I'm going to ask you off the cuff here is, what is something you would say to a newer official, recommend to them, especially as they approach you as a coach in their first few years?
Just hang in there. It sounds crazy and stuff, but we do. We've got a lot of good officials, but we need new officials, young officials, and we need them staying in it. We're fortunate here in Vermilion as well. Steve Mayer and Connor Singheisen at the college and at the Wellness Center, but they do a lot of training of young officials that are going to school at USD, and trying to just get them involved and get going, whether it be football, basketball, whatever the case is, umpiring and baseball. But so we get to see some of those guys, and some of them will start doing our sub-varsity games. And we've seen some of those sub-varsity guys that eventually become varsity officials throughout the state. But I've also seen quite a bit of them that they'll start it, want to get into it. But this goes back to when we're saying coaching and officiating is hard to do, and you just got to kind of hang with it, because and I know, especially with basketball, it's the one sport, I tell you, a lot of fans, because you're right in on the action, and I think a lot of fans think they know every rule. They think they could be a coach, and they think they could be an official. And until you're in those situations, and that's hard for young officials, is if you're getting fans right on top of you. It's bad enough, it's bad enough having us coaches get after you, but then to have fans constantly getting on you and stuff. And I think that's why we're losing some of the young officials. My biggest advice is you just got to kind of hang in there, and sometimes you got to have some thick skin and just kind of grind it out and stay in it.
Yep, absolutely. I completely agree. Just stick it out. It'll kind of smooth sailing. It'll get a little bit better as you get more into it. Again, Coach Jay Drake, thank you again for joining me this evening. Any last words for anyone watching?
No, I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast. I think it's going to be really good. I look forward to seeing, just the other coaches and officials, and like anything that you can do to help kind of build the bond and cohesionness, and officials. And we've got good ones out there. And some of them have gone from officiating to coaching, and vice versa, coaching to officiating.
Yep.
It's just good to see that, and we appreciate everything you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. This is the Irenic Ref podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gross, and we thank you for joining today.